It is Wednesday on the Lunduk Show, which means it's time to do tech news. We're doing general tech news here. This is the first week we're actually doing this. Normally, I mostly cover free software and Linux news, but I'm branching out. I'm diversifying. I'm being agile and mobile. It's crazy time, so I'm doing tech news all day today. Every week on Wednesday, tech news here on the Lunduk Show. Now, I should say before we get into this, today's show will have bad words in it. And it's not because I'm angry. It's not because I've decided to take up swearing like a sailor. It's because it's part of the news today. Normally, this show is fairly work and family friendly. You can play this in the office and everyone will laugh and learn something and go home better friends. Not today. Today there's going to be swearing because it's part of the news. So fair warning, put on the headphones, send the impressionable 7-year-old out of the room, because we'll be saying some naughty words. My apologies. That's just the way things have to be. And before we go any further, I would be remiss if I did not point out that this episode is sponsored in part by System 76, who, as of today, are now accepting Bitcoin. You can now buy Linux-powered laptops and desktops from System 76 in Bitcoin. No joke, including the Galago Pro, which is an absolutely delightful Linux-powered, all-metal, space-agey, totally rad laptop that I don't have, and my life is worse for it. But you can pick up a Galago of your own over at System76.com. Now, the big news. Let's do the big one right up front. We've got actually quite a few really fun stories this week. Fun is a debatable word, but we have to talk about Intel before we go any further. Now, if you have not been following along, it has come out in recent days that there is a bug, let's just call it a bug, in modern Intel CPUs made over the last decade-ish. And that bug is... Well, basically, it allows for malicious code to gain access to basically all of the RAM in your machine, basically to go from user space to kernel space relatively easily. And this is a hardware level bug relating to how Intel does kind of predictive optimizations of code at runtime. This is a horrible, horrible thing. It's very, very, very bad. And the reason it's very bad is that it can't be fixed through some sort of an easy firmware update from Intel. At least that's what we're understanding so far. Part of this is under embargo, which at least for a couple of days means we're just guessing a little bit here. In fact, pretty much everything that we know about this issue comes from the Linux kernel development mailing list. And in fact, many of the articles, if you've read articles, if you've listened to podcasts or watched news reports of this, are gleaning all their information from posts to the Linux kernel mailing list. So I'm actually going to walk you through those exact posts because I figure you guys don't need to hear me reiterate in my own words what's happening. I'm going to show you exactly what's happening with actual code snippets and actual mailing list screenshots from the actual Linux kernel mailing list in a second here. But the real downside here is that this could have a really significant performance impact because in order to fix it, well, let's get into that. Let's actually dive into that. Well, right off the bat, this comes from the register. The details of the vulnerability within Intel Silicon are under wraps, like I was saying. An embargo on the specifics is due to lift early this month, perhaps in time for Microsoft's patch Tuesday of next week. So I'm recording this on Wednesday. Next Tuesday, Microsoft is scheduled to be releasing an update to fix their end of it. It's already in the Linux kernel. Indeed, patches for Linux kernel available for all to see, but comments in the source code have been redacted to obfuscate the issue. I find that troublesome. I'll kind of just gloss over that a little bit for the moment because it's fairly standard practice for people to kind of keep these sorts of security issues a little bit hush-hush for a while. This happens a lot, both in the Linux development communities and the Mac and Windows communities as well. When these security issues arise, whether it's in hardware or software, a lot of times a lot of back-channel communication will occur between the key players and like Microsoft, Apple, the Linux developers, etc., and they will work to provide a fix in time, hopefully, for when it's publicly announced what the exploit is. I have very mixed feelings about that. I'm a big fan of daylight is the best disinfectant, right? I like just simply knowing things. I like things being out in the public. I like information just being known by all. On the other hand, there's a very valid point to make where this is a very significant exploit, and if a lot of people are going around using it before the operating systems have patched it, that could be potentially quite disastrous. So very, very mixed emotions on that. So how is this being addressed? How is this particular thing being fixed? All right, I'm going to walk you through it. The first is a post from, and my apologies for you watching the video version, the name down there is Dave Hansen. Dave Hansen originally posted this, but my face is covering up the sin on Dave Hansen, so sorry, Dave. I'm just going to read this post from earlier in the year about Kaiser, which is what the fix was called at that point. This is from the Linux kernel mailing list. Kaiser is a countermeasure against attacks on kernel address information. There are at least 3 existing published approaches using the shared user kernel mapping and hardware features to defeat KASLR, and that's address space randomization. Basically, it's an approach for kind of randomizing the address space for what the kernel is using at any given point in time. It's great way to kind of keep the kernel and keep your system more secure. One approach referenced in the paper locates the kernel by observing differences in page fault timing between present but inaccessible kernel pages and non-present pages. Kaiser addresses this by unmapping most of the kernel when user space runs. It leaves the existing page tables largely alone and refers to them as kernel page tables. For running user space, a new shadow copy of the page tables is allocated for each process. The shadow page tables map all the same user memory as the kernel copy, but only maps a minimal set of kernel memory. I know a lot of you are kind of going, huh? But basically, think of it like this. In order to keep things more secure, you're basically swapping kernel in and out of the user accessible memory space. It's pretty straightforward, but it can be potentially very big performance impact. And he continues, Kaiser will affect performance for anything that does system calls or interrupts. Everything. Just the new instructions and add a few hundred cycles to a syscall or interrupt. Most workloads that we have run show single-digit regressions. 5% is a good round number for what is typical. The worst we have seen is a roughly 30% regression, meaning 30% slower, on a loopback networking test that did a ton of system calls and context switches. More documentation about possible performance impacts are in the new documentation file. And in fact, people have been kind of testing with this and kind of hypothesizing about this. And yeah, between 5 and 30% seems to be the indication of what it's probably going to impact us, which means that in order to fix this security exploit, and it's a huge security exploit of the kind that it isn't theoretically possible for a web page to gain access to your system memory. I mean, this we're talking like rootkit level bad here. This is incredibly bad, and so it is something that has to be addressed in order to keep our systems that are connected to the internet secure. However, we are going to see a significant, if you're running Intel CPUs, performance degradation because of this. Significant. But there's the suggestion right now is anywhere from 3 to 30%. 3 to 30%. Can you imagine 30% slower because you got an upgrade? It's almost like we're running Windows. Now, where it started to get kind of fun, when things got a little bit lighter, is when Thomas Gleixner, one of the developers on the Linux kernel, posted this to the Linux kernel mailing list. This is where it starts to get good. Luckily, there's a silver lining in all of this. They were talking about, and this is, I believe, in December, the beginning of December now. So we're about December 4th-ish. Several people, including Linus, requested to change the Kaiser name. Okay, they didn't want Kaiser as the name. We came up with a list of technically correct acronyms. And here's 2 of them that they came up with. User Address Space Separation, better known as UAS. or forcefully unmap complete kernel with interrupt trampolines. Trampolines, because, you know, you're bouncing, basically you're bouncing the kernel all over the place in your memory. So it's like a trampoline, right? So forcefully unmap complete kernel with interrupt trampolines, aka fuckwit. But we are politically correct people, so we also can settle for kernel page table isolation, or KPTI. Linus, this is your call. So they deferred over to Linus, and on December 4th, Linus said, I think you probably chose the right name here. The alternatives sound intriguing, but probably not the right thing to do. So officially, Linus, who has used the word fuckwit in the Linux kernel mailing list when talking about other people, declined having the name fuckwit in the source code. So you may have seen this reported a couple of places. This is the exact spot where it's actually talked about. In case you wanted to go look it up for yourself and see where they talk about possibly naming a fix for one of the biggest security holes of all time, fuckwit. And now I am done with the swearing portion of this show. My apologies to anyone whose ears were just too sensitive for that. Now here's where it started to get even more fun. Tom Lendacki, from a engineer who works for AMD, posted this on December 26th. AMD processors are not subject to the types of attacks that the kernel page table isolation feature protects against. The AMD microarchitecture does not allow memory references, including speculative references that access higher privileged data when running in a lesser privileged mode, when that access would result in a page fault. Disable page table isolation feature by default on AMD processors by not setting the x86 bug CPU insecure feature, which controls whether PTI is set. The page table interrupts is set. In fact, Tom Lendacki then goes on to actually submit the following line of code. And the code that you're seeing on the screen right now, I'll walk you through it if you don't read C very well. Basically, it's saying if the vendor of the current CPU, the company that makes the CPU, is not AMD, well then set that insecure flag because it's insecure. So in other words, if you're not running AMD, you're not secure. AMD literally submitted this patch and it was accepted. So it is now officially in the Linux kernel source code that AMD is the only way to be secure. That's in the source code. That made me smile. Like, I don't have brand loyalty for Intel or AMD. In fact, Intel headquarters is a couple of blocks away from my house. I am right here in the heart of Intel land. Many friends over at Intel, but you guys are having a bad week. I gotta give a shout out to AMD because man, AMD's got to be having a good week. We'll talk about more about that in a second. But I posted this exact screenshot up on Twitter as soon as I saw it because I'm like, oh my God, that is the most epic burn in source code submitted to the Linux kernels that I've ever seen. It's just fantastic. And I posted that up, and that tweet's already got like 1,000 almost retweets or something like that. Like, people are like, damn. And I tell you, and I'm going to be straight up with you, AMD, if you're watching, and I know marketing people from AMD are watching my show right now, I recommend that you take those 2 lines of source code and put that on a billboard. Nothing else on it. Get people talking about that, because those 2 lines of code are one epic burn on Intel, and you guys are not going to get another chance to burn Intel like that, because you know Intel is going to come back and try and find a way to fix things, at least on new CPUs, and they're probably not going to make the same mistake again. Take advantage of this. If I was working in marketing over at AMD, I would put this on a billboard. I would put this on a billboard right outside Intel headquarters, outside of Portland, Oregon. I would put it up. I would put it up in the Silicon Valley. I would put it up. I would get a Times Square screenshot of just that line of source code. It would get no logos. Don't put anything else on there. Just get people talking about. That's totally what I would do. So anyway, free marketing advice for you, because that's fairly inexpensive and that would go crazy. Now, here's something interesting. Now, you remember when we were talking about the timelines here. Now, this has been known for a little while now, but the official naming of it and the submission of the updated patches to the Linux kernel happened near the beginning of December. Well, less than 2 weeks or about 2 weeks after that, the CEO of Intel sold all of the stock that he could legally sell. And really, really specifically, like all of it. And this is from fool.com. I was looking through this and oh, sorry. I just said the dates wrong. The sale happened at the end of November, a couple of days before they changed the name from Kaiser to KPTI for the fix. But the fix was already known by Intel, and it would have been impossible for the CEO of Intel to not know about this. So sorry, I got the days off by about 2 weeks there, but the point still stands. So Brian Krzanich, CEO of chip giant Intel, reported several transactions in Intel stock. Most of the transactions were involved in him exercising employee stock options. Those allowed him to purchase Intel shares at a price significantly below where they currently are trading, and then immediately selling those shares that he bought at a discount on the open market. Pretty straightforward. Since Krzanich was appointed Intel CEO of May of 2013, he'll need to have 250,000 shares by May of 2018, about 5 months from now. That's just a rule he has to have. And if you go to over fool.com and look for this article, they actually have a table breakout where how many shares each executive has to have at any given point in time. What's interesting then is that before Krzanich made any of the transactions that he reported in his most recently filed Form 4, he held 495,000 shares. After the options exercised and subsequent sales, which left Krzanich's position unchanged at 495,000 shares, Krzanich then made 2 more transactions, a sale of 242,000 shares and a sale of another 2,900 shares, with each transaction happening at an average price of $44 per filing. Those 2 transactions left Krzanich with exactly 250,000 shares, the bare minimum that he's required to hold as CEO. So basically, as this bug was about literally within, if you knew that these changes were going to be submitted onto the public Linux kernel mailing list on December 4th, the possibility of that becoming breaking news was possible December 4th onward. Now, this really didn't come to most people's attentions until just the last couple of days, almost a month later. And a lot of that is due to because December is crazy for most people, so it kind of slid under the radar. But as you're the CEO of Intel, a few things. One, it would be almost impossible to not know this was happening. It just simply would have. It would have been absolutely impossible. 2, he sold everything he was legally allowed to sell right before it went public. Now, I'm not a stock expert. I'm not a financial expert of any kind. I have a hard enough time just balancing my checking account. But this, to me, makes my eyebrows go up just a little. So what's happening with stock right now? Well, this is what's happening right over the last couple of days with Intel stock. Yeah, it's taken a hit. It's down. It's down about 5.5% as of earlier today, and it seems to be continuing to go down. My guess it's going to go down a little bit further. On the flip side, this is what's happening to AMD stock. AMD stock's up 8% and is taking a big jump, and my guess is it's probably going to go up a little bit further as well. Yeah, so make all of that what you will. I'm not saying anyone sold stock at Intel illegally. I'm not saying that. But the CEO would have had to have known about this issue. He would have had to have known this was about to become public. And he sold really just a couple of days before the first possible opportunity for it to really become public. Yeah, he sold everything that he could. Just saying. Let's move on from this Intel bug because, yeah. And let's talk about something a little more ridiculous. This came from BusinessInsider.com, a report from analysts over at Citi analyzing mergers and acquisition candidates for Apple. So they were kind of looking ahead at 2018, and Citi's analysts were thinking, well, what would make sense for Apple to buy? Apple's got like a boatload of cash, and why wouldn't they go on an acquisition spree? And it came out that it was a over 40%, according to them, likelihood that in 2018, Apple would buy Netflix. There was odds floating around about them buying Disney and Electronic Arts and even Tesla, but those were all low probability things. But 40% plus probability that Apple would buy Netflix. I don't really know if there really is a 40% probability of that or not, but I simply wanted to report this, to put this out in the universe, that would be just awful. How many people use Netflix and have used Netflix for many years and have been thinking to themselves, gee, I find it annoying how I can still watch Netflix on older devices. Wouldn't it be great if I could only watch Netflix on Apple devices, specifically Apple devices made in the last couple of years? Wouldn't that be ideal? I just don't know anyone who's thought that before. But if Apple bought Netflix, I can't see anything else happening. I've also never heard anyone think, gee, I wish the only way to watch Netflix was via iTunes. Never heard that happening either. I can't think of a single good thing that could possibly come out of this happening. It would make Netflix crappy. It would make a bunch of people who like Netflix right now not like Netflix. It would cost a ton of scratch for Apple. And it would basically make Apple known as the company that ruined Netflix. So, yeah, I don't think they're actually going to do that, Citi, because that would be the stupidest possible move I could possibly think of in the entire world. No, that's not going to happen. Moving on. This is kind of an interesting one, just in other Apple news. And I'm going to read this here from thelocal.fr. A French activist group has launched a criminal lawsuit against Apple over its policy of slowing down older iPhones, in a case that could see the tech giant's executives jailed and cost it 5% of its income if convicted of the crime of planned obsolescence. This is kind of interesting. So you guys have probably seen the news where Apple has actually slowed down older iPhones, and the excuse they gave was, oh, you know, batteries are worse, so we slow it down to help your batteries last longer. And so we didn't tell you about it, we just slowed it down. Really, it was planned obsolescence, right? I mean, they were making machines intentionally slower over time. Well, I'm going to read some more of this article because this is absolutely this is interesting to me on multiple levels. The move by HOP in French, Halt à la obsolescence programmée, stopped planned obsolescence. I probably butchered that French. I'm sure I did. An environmental association comes after lawsuits were launched this week in the U.S. against Apple for similar reasons. The suit was filed on Wednesday in the Paris prosecutor's office, HOP said in a statement. And I quote, Apple has put in place a global strategy of programmed obsolescence in order to boost its sales of new iPhones, the group says. HOP believes that the U.S. firm can be sued over the sale of all iPhones in France since the introduction of the law in August of 2015 that made it a crime to, and I quote, deliberately reduce the lifespan of a product to increase the rate of replacement. First, I did not realize that was a law in France. That's awesome. Planned obsolescence makes me want to punch a donkey. We all know big companies do it. We all know they do it. Many big companies do it. Not all. Some companies are cool, but you know a lot of companies do it. The fact that there's a law in France literally says it's a crime to have planned obsolescence is awesome. Awesome. We need that law in the United States. If we should have that law. If we have that law, no one's ever told me about that law because I would use that law. We would sue so many companies, starting with Apple. Holy heavens to Betsy. Oh my goodness. That is awesome. And second, I'm glad people are suing Apple over this. I mean, it's not just because I'm not a fan of Apple, and I'm not. I don't like their business practices, but specifically, they're a huge company and they need to be treating their customers with respect. This treats what their Apple's actions are not treating customers with respect, and they need to be taught that lesson. And in order to learn that lesson, it needs to be more painful than whatever it is they gained by implementing planned obsolescence. So I love this. Yes, basically sued over the sale of all iPhones in France. All of them. Awesome. Just awesome. Here's another interesting tidbit. Moving over to Microsoft for a moment. One of the latest builds of Windows 10, build 17063, actually requires you to enter your cell phone number before installing it. That's just something worth noting. That's crazy. I'm assuming, and many people across the internet and the various forums are assuming that this must be a fluke. This has got to go away. Either this was a bug, or the backlash will be so extreme that Microsoft will pull this out. But whatever it is, it actually says Windows loves all your devices. Get essential apps that help you work better across your devices. Please enter a valid phone number. And it asks you to enter the phone number and hit send. And below it says Microsoft uses your phone number this one time only, and the information will not be stored. Standard SMS rates may apply. It implies that you have to do it. I mean, it says you have to do it. There's no way to skip past it. So hopefully for Windows users, Microsoft changes their mind on this, or fixes this, or does something where this is just a totally optional, weird installation thing. But yeah, this is in the Windows build installer for build 17063 of Windows 10. Thank God I run an operating system that does not ask me for my cell phone number when I install it. That is bizarre, just downright bizarre. Moving forward, actually, there's a couple of news items coming out about governments blocking off internet access and communication. This is crazy to me. This one comes from Reuters. Congo orders internet and SMS cut ahead of anti-government demonstrations. This is specifically the Democratic Republic of Congo. So the Democratic Republic of Congo's government on Saturday ordered telecommunication providers to cut internet and SMS services across the country ahead of planned anti-government demonstrations. Grassroots Catholic activists have called for marches in major cities on Sunday to demand that President Joseph Kabila commit to not changing the Constitution to stand for a third term and release political prisoners. So the government said there's going to be demonstrations. We want to squelch it, so they're cutting off the internet. That's insane. I mean, holy moly. And it's not the only place that's doing that. Check this out. Check this out. This is from Al Arabiya. This is the English edition of Al Arabiya. This was posted on December 31st, this last Sunday. Several reporters indicate that telecoms providers in Iran have begun blocking internet access across several cities in the country as mass protests erupted for the third day in a row. Among the telecoms companies was I'm gonna butcher all these names, and my apologies, everyone. Hamrahe Aval, the primary mobile telecommunication company of Iran, as social media continues to play a pivotal role in documenting mass protests and subsequent brutal crackdown on peaceful protesters in the country. The MTCI, the Mobile Telecommunications Company of Iran, is considered a firm jointly held by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and other firms controlled by Iran's supreme leader, Al-Khamenei. So both Iran and the Democratic Republic of Congo are not good places to be on the internet streaming YouTube right now, because there's no internet. So that sucks. Man, you know, I'm all for... It's hard. This kind of makes me think, you know, over the last, year or so, so many of us have been so upset about many things internet related, whether it's net neutrality or DRM or many other kind of internet freedom related issues. And I think justifiably so. I mean, it makes sense that we want to fight for internet freedom. And then we look at a couple of these countries who are literally, the government has the ability and the control to simply take away that internet access. Just take it away entirely. That is terrifying. And I'd hate... I become terrified whenever I see any involvement in the government, in any government, no matter how wonderful the government, in the telecommunications and communications infrastructure. It makes me really, really nervous, because then it makes it that much easier for things like this to happen. Anyway, my heart goes out to the people in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Iran for what's going on right now, and hopefully you get your internet back soon, friends. Moving on to more fun and completely ridiculous news. This is a picture I got from Engadget of a 8K TV from LG. Oh my Lord. Looking at the specs for this. This is from the Engadget article on this. Just as 4K and HDR are finally going mainstream, the ambitious folks at LG Display have also been busy pushing its OLED technology to 8K. At CES, the Korean manufacturer will be letting attendees get up close with its new 88-inch 8K OLED display. Can we just call it the 888? Which is both the largest and the highest resolution OLED panel to date. But as far as specs go, that's all we have for now. Holy heaven, 8K. So what exactly does 8K mean? I mean, 8K, that's insanity. This show is a 1080p show, and I don't even know that it should be a 1080p show. But 8K resolution, or 8K UHD as it is sometimes called, is the current highest ultra-high definition television resolution in digital television and digital cinematography. 8K, this is from Wikipedia, 8K refers to the horizontal resolution of 7,680 pixels, forming the total image dimensions of 7680 by 4320, otherwise known as 4320p. 8K UHD has 2 times the horizontal and vertical resolutions of 4K UHD, with 4 times as many pixels overall, or 16 times as many pixels as full HD. So what does that look like? Well, here's a comparison of standard definition, full 1080p HD, 4K HD, and 8K Ultra HD. So I was just talking with a friend the other day. I think it might have even been on one of the shows last week or the week before, about how honestly I could do this show in standard definition and it would still be basically the same show, whether it's an HD, standard definition, 4K, none of that really matters. And look at the little tiny postage stamp that standard definition is down there, sitting in that little itty bitty bottom left hand corner. Look at the adorable little standard definition. There was a time when really good standard definition was like amazing. And then once this doesn't even count 720p, which is just somewhere in between standard def and full HD, and it just goes up from there. I mean, my main TV is a full HD set. It's a 1080p set. I don't have a 4K set. Now 8K sets are coming along that are 16 times as big, as many pixels. Holy heavens! And what's crazy is 8K at that pixel density is such that when you're standing, I can't remember how far it is from the screen, but it's pretty close to the screen. The human eye can't differentiate the pixels. So that's intense. Oh man, back over to slightly less ridiculous but more of a bummer news. This post from XDA-developers. More than 250 Android games use your mic to track what you're watching. I'm going to read some of this here, and then I've got a few things to say about it. For years, people have accused companies of using their smartphone's microphones to record conversations. We talked about the unlikelihood of corporate eavesdropping back in June, but paranoid delusions aside, some bad actors are actually listening in, and somewhat unsurprisingly, they're middlemen for marketers. Well, there's more to it than that, and I'll talk about that momentarily. Alfonso, a startup that sells media viewing data supplies a plugin that listens for audio signals in shows and movies. Roughly 250 mobile games and social applications in the Google Play Store use it to deliver targeted ads, according to the New York Times. A few of which include innocuous-sounding titles like Pool 3D, Beer Pong Trick Shot, and Real Bowling Strike 10 Pin. Even scarier, the software's accurate enough to detect audio when your phone's in a pocket or a book bag. Alfonso CEO Ashish Cordia told the New York Times that it worked with movie studios to analyze movie viewing habits and with Shazam to collect music listening data. So now, there's a couple of things here. First, this sucks. If you've got an Android device, or realistically even an iOS device, you are being eavesdropped on. And it's not just by governments, it's by corporations, it's by all sorts of different people, and it's all sorts of people, right? I mean, you're being snooped on. You just are. In fact, if you have the opportunity to do so, I was on a TV show for the History Channel called Breaking Mysterious that isn't airing in the United States yet, but it has air dates in Canada and the UK and Australia and I think the UK and a bunch of other places. There was just a marathon of it just this last week. Check out an episode of that. The first episode of that show is called The Watchers. I filmed this episode over a year ago. I went down to Los Angeles and filmed this episode for Breaking Mysterious for the History Channel. And we're talking about surveillance via cell phones and how cell phones can and are used for active surveillance. And some of that is fairly innocuous. Some of that is for marketing purposes. Some of that is for bad actors. There's a wide variety there. But the reality is that there's a huge number of applications that are collecting data and telemetry on you at almost all times. Whether your phone is in front of you and with the screen turned on or not. The reality is your phones are always running and your phones are multitasking, even if you have a phone that doesn't seem like it multitasks. It is. There's processes running in the background. It knows where you are. It knows where you've been. It tracks your whereabouts. If you have an Android phone, you can even go in and you can see that it knows, both your phone knows and Google itself knows everywhere you've been with it. It tracks you walking around. You can even download that data from Google's website, and you can see how it knows where you've been, when you were there, how fast you were walking, how fast you were driving. It knows all of these things. And we know for a fact that multiple governments and multiple government agencies have the ability to remotely enable microphones and cameras on desktops and smart devices. We know that. That's an established fact. It's not some sort of crazy conspiracy theory. It's just simply the reality of the world we live in. Then the question then becomes, how comfortable are we with that? How comfortable am I or are you with that happening? And there's a very reasonable case to say, well, it's okay if they're collecting data on me. It's okay if they can see me when I'm holding my phone going to the bathroom playing Candy Crush. It's okay if they can listen to every conversation I have and they know all my whereabouts at all times, day and night. These are okay. It's okay if they know what websites I go to. It's okay if I use the keyboard that has a predictive typing technology, so it's always sending information back to the server, so they know all the things I type and search for, and that's tied in with my user data. I'm okay with that. You can be okay with that. I'm not okay with that, which is part of why I did a TV show around it. So look for Breaking Mysterious. Again, it's the episode called The Watchers. I believe it's the first episode of the very first season of the show, where we talk about that. And I spent a lot of time talking about Pokemon Go in that episode because it made sense at the time. This was about a year ago, not long after Pokemon Go had kind of become bigger and bigger. And it was just simply a good example to use to illustrate all of these issues. But the reality is these issues are very, very common, and we need to be aware of them. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that there are more than 250 Android games using your mic to track what you're watching. The reality is that's a low number. It just is. What they're saying is there's more than 250 Android games verified to do that with a specific plugin from a specific company. That's the headline there. So anyway, so you can check that if you want to see me on the bigger screen. You can put it up on one of those LG 8K sets. See how the pores on my face look on that one. This episode of the Lunduke Show is brought to you in part by Pogo Linux. Specifically, I love this server. The Atlas 223-12 is a nice little rack mount server with dual AMD EPYC processors. Notice it's an AMD. We're not talking about an Intel CPU in this on this particular rig here. Up to 4 terabytes of RAM, 12 hot swappable drive bays, 4 Ethernet ports, which is 3 more Ethernet ports than I have on any machine I currently own. I kind of want 4 Ethernet ports now, and a redundant power supply. Really, really wicked awesome. You can get it. I believe you can put that multiple different Linux distributions on there. It's all customizable. If you go over to pogolinux.com, you can configure one for yourself, or just dozens of other servers that they can kind of custom tailor to your needs. All running Linux if you want them. Pogolinux.com. And of course, Lulzbot. Lulzbot make the most kickinest 3D printers on the market, which I've got one Lulzbot Mini right back there. You can also get the Lulzbot Taz 6 with a much bigger print bed. The Lulzbot Mini does a 6x6 by 6 inch cube, so you can print pretty big stuff. I've never actually run into a limitation of much that I can't print with a Lulzbot Mini, but man, if I wanted to print something really big or a whole bunch of smaller objects all at once, you can't go wrong with the Lulzbot Taz 6. You can check them out over at lulzbot.com. And I should thank my supporters. Really, this show would not be possible without the supporters I have. I'm really a truly lucky guy. Not only am I able to do this full time, but I'm able to do so with a really clear conscience. I have 3 supporters of this show right now, and they're all freedom-loving companies that support free software, open standards, open technologies, and really push things forward. And I love that. And the people that pitch in a couple of bucks at a time over at Patreon really make a big difference. And to say thank you for them, thank you to them. They get the audio version of this show. If you would like this show in audio RSS format, so you can download it into whatever podcatcher you want, go over to patreon.com/Brian Lunduke. Pitch in whatever amount you want, $1, whatever. Every little bit helps, and you get a virtual high five for that, and you get a link to use this in whatever podcatcher you want to listen to this on the go. If you can't get enough of the Lunduke Show, you can listen to it in the car that way. In fact, these are a bunch of the top level supporters as of right now. I have multiple tiers of support, and these guys are the bee's knees. You guys are just awesome. I mean, all of my supporters are awesome, but these ones get their name on the screen. All right. Today's Wednesday. That wraps up Wednesday. Tomorrow is Linux Thursday. We do this every Thursday where we take your questions. It's not the news. It's not me ranting. It's not me talking about other things. You decide what we talk about. As long as it's Linux, free software, open source, open technology, open hardware related, you can make it into the show. How you do that? We're shaking it up a little bit this week. Go over to either Twitter or Mastodon. And you tweet at me, at Brian Lunduke, over on Twitter, and use the hashtag Linux Thursday. All one word, hashtag Linux Thursday. And on Thursday, before we record the show, I'll sit down, I'll pull all of those up, and boom, we'll hit it. We will answer as many as we can. It's very rare that we can even get through a quarter of the questions because you guys come up with some great stuff every week. But get it in there, and at least you got a shot. And then on Friday, come on back here. Not computer news, not Linux news, not technology news, like stuff about aliens and stuff. The Lunduke Files will be making its grand debut on Friday. All right. Thank you, everybody. I love you all. Look at that. This is the second show in a row where I forgot to turn off automatic spell checking in my slideshow. Look at that. So I've got little squiggly underlines. Every URL I make is apparently always spelled incorrectly. I am ridiculous. That is all for today. That is it. And come back tomorrow when I hopefully turn off spell checker.